Greetings, fellow book lovers, and welcome back to Colin's Corner. Today, I'm going to be doing a video about the Tawny trilogy. Now, about 3 weeks ago, I posted a question on my community tab asking you guys if you had a preferred method for me to review this trilogy, because I was considering maybe changing up my typical non-spoiler review for this series, only because it is the third series in the third trilogy in a 16-book series, and I figured maybe a lot of people wouldn't want to just watch a non-spoiler review of this one. I feel like, you know, if you've read Farseer and if you've read Live Ship, you probably want to hear some spoiler thoughts. The two most popular choices were basically tied. One of them was to do brief non-spoiler thoughts with a spoiler review, and the other one was a non-spoiler review with spoiler thoughts at the end. And I think I'm just going to kind of do a half and half thing where I talk about this series and the realm of the Elderlings up until this point, and then give my spoilery thoughts for the second half. I don't know, I've been really kind of putting this one off because I'm nervous about trying to articulate my thoughts on this series so far, particularly the Tawny trilogy, but hey, I'm going to give it my best effort. However, before we begin, we of course have to go over the answer for the last Comedy with Colin segment, where I asked you guys the joke: why did the can crusher quit her job? The answer? Because it was soda pressing. Alright, with that out of the way, let's get on with this review. Now, disclaimer, this first part is going to be non-spoiler. I will let you guys know definitively when I'm going to be jumping into spoiler territory, so there's no worries yet. Now, I am, as of the recording of this video, finished with 9 of the 16 Realm of the Elderlings books, and halfway done with Dragon Keeper, which is the first book in the Rain Wilds Chronicles. Now, after finishing the Tawny trilogy, I cannot believe that I am only halfway through, and I also cannot believe that I am already halfway through the Realm of the Elderlings books. So, for those of you who don't know what the Tawny trilogy is about, I'll just go over briefly where the storyline picks up. Right off the bat, we get to reconvene with Fitz. The events of the Tawny trilogy are taking place 15 years after the events of the Farseer trilogy, which puts Fitz at about 35 years old now. Fitz has spent the last 15 years trying to isolate himself from Buckkeep Court and anything at all related to it. He's been living in a small cottage with his adopted son Hap, and kind of just living off the land, and with his knowledge of gardening and herbs and his knowledge of hunting and fishing, it's been sufficient for him to use those skills for nourishment, and he just lives a very quaint life. If it's been a while since you read Farseer, then you may not remember that virtually everybody in the Six Duchies thinks that Fitz Chivalry Farseer is dead. So he has essentially adopted a new identity, and he goes now by Tom Badgerlock. After many attempts by the few people who do know who the real Fitz is, to kind of coerce him to come back to where he rightly belongs in the Buckkeep Court, some events develop that more or less force his hand, and he inevitably and reluctantly gets dragged back into all of the drama and the politics that he has spent so many years building up walls against. I'm not going to go too much further into the summary of the trilogy in this non-spoiler part of the video, because I don't even want to reveal to you guys what characters make appearances and what characters don't make appearances, because I think it would be robbing you guys of one of the most amazing emotional parts of this series. Is just seeing who's going to be in it, who's not going to be in it, what parts they're going to play from Farseer. But I do want to just chat a little while about where I currently stand, enjoyment-wise and emotionally, at this point in the series. Have you guys ever just felt like an author is writing the perfect book or series for you? I mean, I am well aware and completely okay with the fact that Robin Hobb's style and her characters may not be for everybody. But I can honestly say, from a personal standpoint, Robin Hobb writes books that they have a way of connecting to my soul, maybe more so than any other author that I've read so far. I went into Farseer a bit hesitantly because it was one of my first experiences with first-person narration, at least in fiction, and I didn't know if I would feel as connected to the characters because of the limited field of view. It took maybe half of Book 1, Assassin's Apprentice, for me to admit I was wrong. Now, I was astounded by Hobbs' ability to build out this web of characters that grew and grew, and that I grew to love so much, all through Fitz's point of view. Right when I felt at home in the Six Duchies and with a narrative choice, I moved on to the live ship traders, which tons of people told me not to skip, and I really had no intentions of skipping it. However, I will say that I put it off for a little while, and again, I was hesitant about it because it wasn't about Fitz and the gang from Farseer, and it was switching to third-person narration, so I had gotten used to first person, now we're switching to third person. It didn't even take place in the Six Duchies. So I was worried that I would miss the intimacy of and familiarity with the world and the characters from the Farseer trilogy, and while I did miss the characters, I quickly became so intrigued and interested by the plot of the live ship traders that I was quite okay with putting the Six Duchies on the back burners to simmer for a while. While at face value, the live ship traders series is a series about ships that come alive, and that sounds a bit silly, and it is a bit silly, but by the end of the Live Ship Traders trilogy, I realized that I had just read some of the most well-realized, nuanced, and layered characters that I have had the pleasure of reading in fiction thus far in my reading career. And Hobb, yet again, had won even more of my trust as a reader to get me where she was intending to get me. And finally, upon returning to many of the characters I knew, I loved, I missed from Farseer in the Tawny trilogy, this felt like coming home in the best way. I have never had a fictional world or cast of characters that I connected so much with more than the realm of the Elderlings. And there have been so many lessons that I've learned about life, growing up, parenting, friendship, duty, honor, love, and just a bevy of other themes that Robin Hobb's writing and characters have taught to me. And she handles them extremely well. They never feel cheesy to me. They never feel overblown or used just for the sake of shock value. They all feel so human, and even though we're in a world with magic and dragons and talking ships and skill communication and wit bonding to animals, and it all feels so believable. The way that she writes characters feels like I know Fitz. It feels like I know a Burrage, I know a Patience, I know a Ketrigan, I know a Regal, I don't know a Fool. That's about the only one, and I don't know a Night Eyes, but you get what I'm saying. I've learned so much, and this kind of this series has had such a large impact on my life that I actually, as a Christmas present to me, I asked my wife to read Assassin's Apprentice, at least the first book in the series, because this has affected me so heavily that I feel like I just want my spouse to share a part in a reading experience that has meant so much to me. I believe that every book in the Tawny trilogy accomplished exactly what it set out to accomplish. Fool's Errand took the time to refamiliarize us with the Farseer characters and created a new and intriguing plot. Golden Fool escalated the intensity and went in some directions that I was certainly not expecting, but that I ended up loving, and Fool's Fate concluded this trilogy in the most perfect way that I could have ever imagined, and became, because of that, for the moment, my personal favorite book that I have ever read, Fool's Fate. It is the first time that I have ever closed the cover of a book upon finishing it and could definitively say, this is my favorite book that I've ever read. Now, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that originally when this series was being published, that the Tawny Man trilogy was supposed to be the end of the series. So I was prepared to be experiencing all the emotions, and experience all the emotions I did. I'll of course get into that here in a minute when I switch to talking about spoilers, which will be very soon. But I do just want to wrap up my non-spoiler section with a few thoughts here. I have a lot of friends in real life that ask me how I'm able to read so much, why I read so much, why I read fantasy and fiction as a 29-year-old man. In a world with so many methods of entertainment and instant gratification, why read books? It's hard to put that into words. I think, I hope through my videos that, my passion and my emotions and my true care for reading and this genre and these authors, I hope that that shows. It's, I truly do have a passion for this. But I believe that the uniquely personal experience of reading is probably the biggest appeal for me. And Robin Hobb, as an author, has provided for me, as a reader, some emotional experiences that I believe truly are only achievable through this medium. For me, the Tawny Man trilogy has been the pinnacle example of this in my reading journey so far, and the exciting thing is I have so much more reading left to go in this series and just in general. This right now is your guys' warning that we are going to be stepping into spoiler territory, so if you have not yet read the Tawny Man trilogy, and you just want to like this video and come back later, now is your cue. I will give you guys, let's say, 5 seconds to head out, and I want to thank you for watching up to this point. And I hope that you do come back and revisit this once you finish the Tawny Man trilogy, because I really do want to hear your thoughts down in the comment section. So we're heading into spoilers in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, spoilers. Alright, well, let's just rip the band-aid off now. Losing Night Eyes was the hardest loss I've read in fiction, other than maybe one other one that was also animal related. Part of the back of my mind was wondering how Night Eyes was still even alive to begin Tawny Man, because I knew already that he was far past the life expectancy of a dog, and I'm assuming that a wolf and a dog have a similar life expectancy. Just the time between Farseer and Tawny Man was 15 years, and Night Eyes was not a puppy at the end of Farseer. So it's like I knew, but I didn't want to accept that Night Eyes was going to have to depart us in some way at some point. I had to go back and read the end of chapter 26 again, because I didn't believe that it was real that he was gone. Even though I felt like Fitz in this moment, it was so obvious he was just going out to hunt, and there was so many, like, he's like, "Are you not coming with me, brother?" And Fitz didn't know what he was asking, and he's like, "No, not yet. Like I'll meet up with you later." And Night Eye is saying, like, I've always had to be the one to lead and show you the way, and it was just unbelievably beautiful. And I think I hadn't realized how much I had come to view Fitz and Night Eyes as a singular character until we lost Night Eyes. Fitz, it was so heartbreaking to hear Fitz describing how much duller his world became the instant he lost Night Eyes, feeling vulnerable without his wolf senses, and completely alone for the first time, basically since he bonded with Night Eyes. I felt that, because deep down, no matter where Fitz was, it always seemed like he could just reach out and, like, even if they weren't physically together, have Night Eyes, or they always knew, they were always tethered in some way. They knew where each other's, where they were physically, or, they always fed off of each other's thoughts, and it was just gone when Night Eyes left. And Fitz, because of the events that were happening in the narrative, wasn't even really given the time to mourn Night Eyes. And that was really sad, because I feel like he just was so as I probably would be too, just emotionally just unavailable and cut off, and seriously just going through the motions, unable to even empathize with Dutiful upon losing his wit cat, which wasn't a true one, but still, just yeah, this was rough, and I wanted to talk about it first because it still sucks now talking about it, even though I finished this in September. Next, I want to just touch briefly on the main overarching plot of this trilogy. So, Prince Dutiful is growing and becoming a young man who someday is expected to take over the reins as the Farseer heir, with Shade now heavily involved in court life. He's basically Ketrigan's Lord Counselor. He feels it is his duty to ensure that Dutiful gets the proper training in the skill and the wit, because, as we know, essentially Verity conceived Dutiful with Ketrigan through Fitz, so Fitz is kind of partway Dutiful's father, but not, because it was Verity using Fitz's body, and it's just weird thing that happened. And anyways, Dutiful has the wit and the skill, and is fairly powerful in it, and doesn't know how to use it, and Shade is just discovering his skill talents and has no ability to be teaching anybody because he's still learning and needs to be taught, and he's starting way late in life. So he tries and successfully tries to bring Fitz back, because he knows that Fitz is essentially the only person that he knows of, at least, that can be the skill master at Buckkeep. So I think it's extremely ironic and so fitting that the exact opposite thing that Fitz wants to happen is exactly what happens to him. He spent so much time, 15 years, building a life for himself that had nothing, exiled himself. He wanted nothing to do with Buckkeep. The only person he talked to was like Starling. And then all of a sudden, he is literally right back to square one, except in a different role, essentially. But he's the skill master, which he never thought he would be the skill master. He's also trying to help people with the wit, and people still don't know it's Fitz Chivalry Farseer, so this entire time he's still acting as Tom Badgerlock and operating in the shadows. So he's got to be sitting there like, all this happened so quickly, he's got to just be sitting there like, how did I end up here again? Watching Fitz and Dutiful's relationship build through his skill training sessions with Dutiful was a really fun experience, and in fact, watching the skill coterie form is one of my favorite parts in the whole trilogy. Now, I was not 100% sure that the Fool was Amber in Liveship Traders until I started Fool's Fate, and he rolled up on a horse named Malta. Now, many of you guys that have read this, you're going to say, oh, so obvious, and I personally just thought that Amber was another person from the same part of the world as the Fool, but wasn't like the prophet, but maybe had some like ability to like prophesize things. I know there were plenty of signs that I could have picked up on to solidify my knowledge that Amber was the Fool, but guess what? It still hit just as great when I realized it, and to know that Fitz's face is sailing around this world as Paragon is freaking sweet. Speaking of the Fool, I know that Fitz and the Fool have gone through their ups and downs in the series until now, but man, their relationship took so many twists and turns in Tawny, man. Lord Golden and his servant Tom Badgerluck, they're bickering and they're badgering, pun intended, back and forth at each other, and just their dialogue when they are acting as Lord Golden and Tom Badgerluck is fantastic. And I feel like the people that are closest to them that still don't know that it's Fitz Chivalry, like Dutiful, and I mean, there were people that picked up on them not really being who they say they are, but that was so much fun to just watch them act as Tom Badgerlock and Lord Golden, and then like go back to their chambers and just take their mask off and be cool again. So I really loved that part, but I got so mad at Fitz multiple times in this series because he said some really hurtful stuff to the Fool, as Fitz does, being stubborn, being a bit foolish, and just I wanted to like wring his neck. I'm like, why are you being so mean to the Fool? But in the end, their just absolute love for each other gets proven tenfold by both sides. And reading about the Fool being tortured in the False Prophet's underground ice chamber was some of the absolute hardest content I have ever had to read. I mean, just as a lover of the Fool, seeing him go through this and knowing that he's just like so pure of heart and doesn't deserve this, and then Fitz just realizing, oh, in this moment, like he's kind of been a bit of a meanie to the Fool, and he's literally watching the Fool get tortured in like probably the worst way possible. Like he's gonna be alive, but like stripped of his identity and memories and everything that was important to him. Like that was horrible, horrible to watch, and I can't imagine reading this during publication, not knowing. Like I know now that Fitz and the Fool trilogy is out there. It's sitting on my shelf, so I know in some way that the Fool didn't really die, but I still was wondering. I was like, is his soul gonna be saved somewhere, and he's not gonna be like physically? I had no idea what was gonna happen, but I was so angry, so angry, and it was such a tense, very graphic and intense and like heart wrenching scene, and then Fitz, when he goes back, to save the Fool, I was so happy he did that, and the way that the Fool was wearing the rooster crown, like that was all awesome, and I'm really glad that the Fool didn't die, obviously. I loved Thick, the Prince's man, and the most powerful skill user probably within the Six Duchies. His ability to skill and not even realize how powerful he is was such a really cool and fun aspect of this whole story and this plot. And the way that the relationship, the skill coterie formed, and how they stood up for each other was inspiring. I mean, I loved how once they all began to be able to communicate using the skill, because they all couldn't at first, and they worked on it for a long time, and I loved how they would just, it added some levity to this extremely serious stuff going on, and Dutiful or Shade bursting in on Fitz's thoughts, and Fitz having to like guard his thoughts now because they could actually get to him, and he couldn't have all those little secrets that he's used to having, and he was more open, and then Fitz having to walk on eggshells around Thick because Thick could just completely overpower him if he wanted to, and Thick eventually figured that out and used it against Fitz, and it was hilarious. Like literally I would laugh out loud at some of these moments where he's like having Fitz bump his head on ships because he's pissed that Fitz made him get on the ship in the first place. So there was some really great camaraderie within the skill coterie once they all could communicate using the skill. Robin Hobb obviously tackles a plethora of themes, like I've already mentioned in this video earlier. However, by the end of the trilogy, the theme that has stuck out the most for me in this series overall is sacrifice. I think there's no more fitting theme than sacrifice over the course of the series this far. All the way back in Forest, we are introduced to Ketrican of the Mountain Kingdom, where she tries to explain to Fitz and the people of the Six Duchies culture that the leader of the Mountain Kingdom is no ruling leader that has a wrath to be feared. Rather, the leader of the Mountain Kingdom is viewed by its people as a sacrifice. They do whatever is needed for their people, even if it means they themselves will not survive. Now, throughout this series, we see so many examples of sacrifice. Verity sacrificing himself to save the Six Duchies during the Red Ship raids. We see Ketrican and the posse in Assassin's Quest sacrifice themselves to go and find Verity on his quest to find the Elderlings. We see Night Eyes and Fitz constantly sacrificing themselves for each other over the course of the books thus far. Fitz believes, mistakenly so, that by sacrificing himself and in the terms of like letting himself be isolated from Molly and Nettle and all the people that he loves, he believes he's sacrificing himself for the betterment of them, which is a mistake. I would probably love to know that he's alive and have a relationship with him, but he believes he's sacrificing himself. We get to meet Swift, we get to meet Burge's son, and he has a moment where he was literally willing to sacrifice himself against the Ice Fire Dragon in Aslavial, or however you pronounce that. And of course, Right after that, we see Burrich not letting that happen and sacrificing himself to save Swift, and then Swift saves the day and he's a big hero, but of course we lose Burrich. We see that through these characters' sacrifices to each other and sacrifices for the greater good, how much they truly love and care for each other, or if they don't, how much they don't. Fitz begins to realize at some point how much people have sacrificed for him as he gets older. I think that's kind of natural. You think about all the things your parents did or sacrificed, or time they sacrificed, or aunts, uncles, grandparents, friends, family friends. You think of all the time and the things that people have done for you. That's time and energy sacrificing that they could have spent on themselves. And it becomes so apparent to Fitz eventually that Burrich, probably more than anybody, sacrificed a single man's bachelor life because Fitz was thrust upon him as a 6-year-old in Assassin's Apprentice. And almost everything that Fitz knows about being a man, he's learned from Burrich. So, as Burrich's kind of dying wish, he asks Fitz to go back and to care for Molly and Nettle and Burrich and Molly's kids. And Fitz feels obligated, after realizing all the sacrifices that have been made to do this. So it's one of those really cool full circle moments that happens in the realm of the Elderlings quite often. But now that Burrich isn't there anymore, physically, we get to see Fitz help to raise these kids. And we will still get to see moments in Burrich's inspiration and Fitz's actions and what he teaches these kids, which we already do see when we get to meet the kids. Fitz just thinks like, oh, I see Burrich in all of these kids, and I see Molly. But now it's going to be a little bit of a mixture of the three of them, which is just beautiful. And like I said before, I truly do not think that this trilogy could have ended any more perfectly with Fitz finally eventually winning Molly's affection back and them living in Withy Woods, in Chivalry's old place. It's everything is so full circle, and it's how it was supposed to be, and I for so long believed it wouldn't be that way, and then Hobb somehow got me there. So I don't know, I'm rambling at this point, but this was an amazing experience, and I can't believe I'm still got 7 books to read? Like, that's insane to me. All in all, Robin Hobb continues to make the case as to why reading fantasy has merit far beyond simply enjoying and escaping for a while. I've learned so much from her about humanity and all the little nooks and crannies within it, and I can't wait to finish out essentially the second half of this series. That's going to do it for today's video, guys. Thanks so much for sticking around this long if you're still here. I knew this was going to be a long one, but I had so many things that I wanted to get out. But before we officially end the video, we of course have to do comedy with Colin, and today's joke is going to be, why are balloons so expensive? If you think you know the answer, add it to your comment below. Guys, if you have read the Tawny Man trilogy, please tell me what you thought. If you agree with my thoughts, if you disagree, if you loved it, if you hated it, I don't care. I want to converse with you guys down in the comment section. It is my favorite part about releasing a video and getting to talk to you guys about your thoughts on the series. I hope you guys are all enjoying what you're currently reading, and remember, you're always welcome in Colin's Corner.